Virtualis the Chess Noob. I'm learning and having fun with chess. Now this game I played earlier in the month and I think it was quite a fun game, and the story is I played about 6 or 7 games that day, lost all of them, maybe drew a couple, and it was around midnight and I was determined to try to win at least one game before going to bed. And in this game, I led caution to the wind, just made some wild attacks, throwing blind haymakers, basically, seeing whether or not I could somehow force a win. And somehow I managed it, and I did, and I was successful, and I won. I don't know what my opponent thought, but let's go straight to the review. So, quick review first on chess.com's computer. Not great numbers here, but as you can see, I got all the way to almost +8, and then sort of blundered all the way to -4, and yet somehow came back to victory. A couple of blunders each. I wonder what my opponent was thinking about some of my moves. All right, let's move on to the analysis. So played white, and with white, if I can, I usually see whether I can play the Vienna game. That's my favorite system. So e4, e5, and then knight to c3. The opponent developed their knight to f6, and so the Vienna gambit, pawn to f4. The opponent knew better than to try to capture that gambited pawn, developed their other knight. Now, as I mentioned in the video yesterday, there is really only one good move for black in response to the Vienna gambit, and that is pawn to d5. As you can see, that gives it's basically equal. That move already concedes a fairly significant advantage to white, and the reason for that is that this position allows me to capture. It looks like the opponent can capture back, and that is the best move, but that immediately invites the follow-up move, pawn to d4, with an attack on the knight. The natural-looking move here is knight back to c6, but at this point I've already got looks like I've got good control of the center, and more importantly, I now have the move pawn to e5, attacking the f6 knight. And the problem for this knight is that it has no good squares to go to. These two squares are defended by that knight, these two squares by the queen, and the knight really must retreat back to g8. And in fact, that is the best move, back to g8, the knight undeveloping. I develop my other knight, push a pawn, develop my bishop. I'm mostly at the end of my theoretical knowledge of this line by now. Opponent pushes another pawn, and I thought I'd better move that pawn out of the way, so moved it forward. Opponent attempts to attack with the queen. Now, usually in these positions, my understanding is defending with the queen in line is usually okay, which is what I did. Computer thinks that that short castles is better in this case. It looks like this potentially is coming, but I thought that was okay because I had the move knight to d5 to attack the queen, and the queen itself is now forced to retreat back, undevelop, go back to its original square. I am completely winning at this point, as you can see by the rating, plus 6.5. I've a massive development lead over black. I short castles. The attack on the bishop occurred. I slide back, and now knight attacking a bishop, and the bishop seemingly with nowhere to go. Now, as this was in the middle of the night, I was in a bit of quandary. I was wondering what I should do. In this setting, I made what was a bad move, which was a pawn push, and I'll explain that move in a while. And the interesting thing here is that that was actually the best move for white, knight to h4. And the reason for that is if knight goes to h4, that potentially allows the queen to slide over to h5. So let's say black makes some sort of lazy move, let's say trying to attack trying to attack the knight. And the queen manages to go to this square. The problem here is that there aren't very many squares that the king can actually go to. This knight protects protects that square. This pawn protects those two squares. So this is, the black is at serious risk of checkmate here. So let's say that one of the few things that they can do in this situation is to block with the pawn. Knight captures, and if they capture back, then that's end of the game, checkmate. So they can't take back. They can't take back in that way. And so in this setting, a potential natural other move would be maybe to capture with the bishop. But in this situation, again, if we move the knight here, the bishop is then forced to block, and again checkmate. And in this position, in fact, the only good moves for black is to sacrifice the queen, either queen to this position, being taken by the knight, or in this position, knight in one of the other positions. So black is in a serious problem here. I did not see that line, of course. So what did I do? Well, what I saw was that I needed to somehow evacuate that bishop, and these two pieces were blocking the way, and so this was the beginning of my my approach to just sacrifice piece after piece. So I'd moved the pawn forward. I could see that it was going to be captured, but I felt that I could capture back with the knight, and in this position, I thought I was being really clever here by attacking the king. The king would capture, but then I would have another check with the knight, and this pawn cannot capture the knight, as it will be pinned by the rook. So I thought I was being really clever with this move, but according to Stockfish, it's a terrible move. I instantly dropped down to -4. Nonetheless, it sort of played out the way I thought. And in this position, I sort of had another move here. It looks like it's a fork of the queen, but of course, he was just going to take with the bishop. But I thought I could take back with the queen. And that's what happened. Now, the opponent decides that I think they thought they were in a pretty good thing here. I'm, let's see, 4 points of material down now. And I think they were thinking that they had an attack on the queen there, which is what they did. Now I thought here that if I could only get my rook here, but it's being protected by that pawn on g7. So I thought, well, why not? I'll go attack that pawn with the bishop. If they took, then I would be able to capture with the rook. And I thought, well, maybe I've got some checkmate to some mating sort of options there. So let's move that back. So there I went. The opponent decided to capture that pawn with an attack on the queen. However, that allowed me to make that move. And given the previous move, I was fairly sure that the opponent, well, I wasn't sure, but I had a suspicion that they would capture the bishop with the king like they did with the other bishop. And if they did that, then I would go here, there'll be check, and then checkmate. And that's what eventuated. Serious blunder by the opponent. Check, checkmate, GG. I'm down 6 points of material, having sacrificed all my minor pieces, both bishops, both knights, and somehow I pull a checkmate back out. GG for the opponent.